Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, well, you can see what I've got. Does this look familiar to you? A lot of houses have these in them. This is an old pocket watch that, it gets handed down over time. This one happens to be an Elgin pocket watch, which was made in the United States. This one was made in 1913, as it turns out. And as you can see, it has a beautiful dial, very straightforward. It's an enamel dial, and the case that this one happens to be in is also machined. This one having been worn, you can see it's a little smoothed over, but you can still see the machining marks on the back. It's got a lovely case, and I can tell almost right away, since I can't pull the crown out to set the time, that this is likely a railroad grade watch. Do you know what that means? I don't know if that's a common thing for people to know. Take a look at this movement though. You're gonna have your mind blown. This is gorgeous stuff. I mean, wow, right? Take a look at that movement. This thing represents one of the top tier of pocket watches from this era, not only in terms of decoration. Look at the little plants that have been etched in to the balance bridge there. Super beautiful. But this also represents one of the best in terms of technical stuff, mechanics. It is absolutely amazing. This thing has 19 jewels in it. You know, even a modern wristwatch will have 17. So this has even more than that would normally have. And even after well over 100 years, I can just wind it up and it still runs. These things are absolutely incredible. And we're going to be restoring this one today. Take a look at the inside of the case back. You can see some things that stand out, and you'll see this often if you happen to have one of these. So do you see how it says guaranteed 25 years? That is specific to the case. And so is that serial number. That has nothing to do with the movement in most cases. Usually the case is made by a third party, not by the company who actually manufactured the movement itself. You can also see some watchmaker marks here too. They'll scratch in a code that lets them know when they worked on the watch, who it was and what they did. When you see things like guaranteed 25 years like this says, that almost always means that the case is either gold filled or gold plated. And it's saying that it won't rub off so that the gold reveals the brass underneath for that time period guaranteed. At least that's what they were able to say back then. We can take off this bezel. And you may be wondering, well, how do you set the time on this watch? Since I showed you I couldn't pull the crown up, do you see that little tiny lever right there? If I pull that out all the way, that's how I can set the watch. And you might wonder, what is up with that? Like, why is it under the bezel that you have to take off just to get to time setting, as that would be something that you may have to do somewhat often? Well, there's two things. One thing, this is a railroad grade watch, and that meant that it was able to be used by people who worked on railroads as like an official timekeeper. And that was really important because, as you might imagine, as trains were being put into place, everybody had to be at the same time. And if you had a timepiece that was not keeping up or going too fast, going too slow, simply wasn't reliable, it could cause accidents. It could cause traffic jams of sorts on the railways. And it was something that really needed to be avoided. So they had this upper tier of pocket watch called railroad grade watches. And that's what this is. And here's the thing with the hand setting. You can't have it be that you accidentally bump the crown and it moves the time over. That could cause huge amount of money. Even people could get hurt. So they hide that little lever under the bezel because there's no way that you could accidentally hit that. You have to literally take the whole front bezel off of the watch to get to it. The other reason is that these were meant to be used every single day, and they're very, very accurate. So you actually, if you kept it wound up, it would be pretty rare that you'd actually need to set the time. So we can take off the case and take a look at this beautiful movement. The hands are off as well. And I can go ahead and take off the dial. The dial's held on by 3 dial screws that are around the outside of the case. And then I should be able to just pop off the dial. I see there's a little bit of damage on the inner circle of the dial. That can be because the watch got dropped and it chipped it. It also could just be some other wear that happened. Again, it is an enamel dial, which is, You can think of it kind of like a form of glass. So it's very brittle, but it's also very resilient. Okay, I can't quite get the dial off right now, but let's just throw the thing on the time grapher and see how it's doing. Pretty dang good. Wow. Plus 8 seconds a day, 260 something degrees of amplitude. And the beat error is at 2.3 milliseconds off. This thing probably hasn't been serviced in 50 years or more. I'm not sure the exact history on it as far as that goes, but I mean, that is absolutely incredible timekeeping for a watch that's over 120 years old and hasn't been used or serviced in like probably 40, 50 years at the earliest. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to let down the mainspring. I can move the little click out of the way, and that allows me to let the mainspring, which is the power source for the watch, unwind very gently. We don't need it to snap. That's the kind of thing that can break the entire mainspring. And I'd like to try to keep this thing as completely original as I possibly can. This watch belongs to kind of an extended family member. And this is a story that you've probably heard or even have experienced yourself where, you know, this belonged to grandpa. In this case, not my grandpa. This is kind of belongs, like I said, to an extended family member. But after he passed away, it ended up with his wife, grandma. And when she passed away, it gets passed down to the children. And, you know, for the most part, people just kind of hang on to these things, or, you know, they don't really know what they have. And they're really interesting where these American pocket watches fall, because during the mid to late 1800s, all the way through the early 1900s, say 1910 through 1920, somewhere in that range, these were commonplace. They were considered a must-have item for many people in society, and they were the default. Men didn't wear wristwatches, and for the most part, women didn't either. So these were the default watch that you would carry around. As I mentioned, this one happens to be a particularly nice model, but you know, think about it like cars, right? Some people have a super nice car, and some people have a car that gets you from point A to point B. And yeah, some people have kind of a beater car that, you know, maybe could use a little bit of work. Pocket watches and watches in general were exactly the same as that. This is a nice one. But you know, these tend to not have a ton of monetary value, which is really interesting because there's no reason other than the fact that they made literally millions of these that they wouldn't. These are extremely well made, as you can see. They're beautiful. They are functional to a point. Most people won't carry a pocket watch right now, but you know, you can use it as a little desk clock. Something, you know, wind it up when you get to the office and it'll keep time for you. They're interesting. And I mean, look how beautiful they are. All those, that's called perlage, those little circles you can see that they put in the bridge, that's all below the stuff that you can even see. And that's all below the stuff that you can even see if you take the back of the watch off. I mean, it's incredible the amount of craftsmanship that they put into these things. But what I was saying is that monetarily, they're not super expensive. This is a really nice one, and I would expect this watch to be worth maybe $300, something like that, which, you know, it's not a tiny amount of money, but geez, given what you see here, how beautiful this thing is, and how well made and all that, and the history behind it. I mean, this was made in America, you know, which isn't something you hear that often anymore about things like this. So just a truly incredible thing that you can find on eBay or elsewhere for a price that, if these were more rare, would be disproportionately high compared to that. I guarantee it. At any rate, so this one, again, ended up kind of with the kids. And, you know, he had a big family, and the family kind of wants to get this one restored and working again so that it can be handed down to his son. And I think that is really, really cool. And honestly, it's just a pleasure to get to work on something like this too. And the fact that, you know, I happen to know them and everything makes it even better. So right now, you saw how well this watch was running, but I kind of want to take this as like a personal challenge to get this thing running really good, because it's not every day that I have something come across my desk like this that's in this good a shape. Finally, by the way, that dial came off. That 1 foot just did not want to let go. And that's why I decided to disassemble the rest of the watch to see if I could maybe get a little bit better access to it. And in fact, it did finally come off. But yeah, these things, I mean, they are just a pleasure to work on, this type of thing. It's also nice. I've mentioned it before, but pocket watches, particularly these American pocket watches, are a really good place to start if you'd like to start working on watches as a hobby, because they're much bigger. You can just see everything easier. You can learn how things work a little bit better. They don't mirror wristwatches exactly, but they're very close, and you'll learn a heck of a lot. And you can pick up kind of broken movements with no case on them, just the movement itself, on eBay for really cheap, like $50. And you can pick up a couple of those. And if you screw them up, hey, it is what it is. But if you get it running, it's really great. And I recommend doing that. I also should mention that, I've started a website with my friend Alex, where I curated toolkits to help get you into this as a hobby. So if this is something that you might be interested in, or a loved one might be interested in, you can go to sutcliffehansen.com. There's a link down below, and you can see the toolkits that I had made up there. Again, even with beginners in mind, or that comes with a movement to practice on, that kind of stuff. And you can pick up a kit, and I recommend this hobby. I think if you're mechanically inclined at all, if you just are interested in this type of stuff, if you think the history behind these are cool, it's been really rewarding for me, and I hope it will be for you. So with the movement fully assembled, we can put it into my watch cleaning machine, which is not as old as this movement, but it's not that far off. And as you can see, this is what it's called a Mastermatic. This one, it's an L&R, which was kind of one of the big companies that made these watch cleaning machines. And it still works great. I had it refurbished with new electronics or electrical wires and stuff inside. And it works really, really well for getting movements very, very clean. While that's cleaning, I do want to say thank you to each and every person who supports me on Patreon. I have a Patreon for this channel. It's a great way to support your favorite content creators. And if my channel is one that you really enjoy, that's a great way to support me directly. It's patreon.com/wristwatchrevival. You get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail, no matter what level you sign up for, and you get some cool perks along the way as well. Thank you very much to everybody who supports me over there. It does mean the world to me. Okay, the other part that we need to clean up, of course, is the case. And I'm going to use my ultrasonic cleaner for that. This is very straightforward with pocket watches because most of them just have a few parts. As you can see, it just comes apart really easily, and I'll just give it a good bath in the ultrasonic cleaner just to make sure that there's no dirt, debris, or anything. It makes it look better, but it also, makes sure that nothing gets caught up in the top or in the parts where it's kind of hard to get to. It's a very pretty case. Nothing super special. This looks like it wants to stay in the pool a little longer. Nothing particularly special about it. It's machined. It's gold filled / gold plated, which means that it's made of brass, and then it has a thin layer of gold applied to the outside of it to give it that look. But yeah, nothing crazy. But take a look how absolutely stunning this movement is when it's been all taken apart. I mean, is that not just completely stunning? The amount of effort put into the tiniest details on this movement is just shocking. Look, that's that perlage I mentioned. Every one of those little circles has to be applied individually. And again, look at when I'm done putting the watch back together, most of that's covered up. Like, this is stuff that is just above and beyond craftsmanship for the sake of craftsmanship. And it is... oh, it's a sight to behold. I really love these old railroad grade watches, especially. I mean, they are so sweet. And, as somebody who's been working on watches for a little while now as a hobby, I can really appreciate some of the really cool design elements that went with it as well. I didn't actually take the mainspring out of the case or out of the barrel here because I started to take the barrel off, but it really felt like it didn't want to let go. And I'm not going to be changing the mainspring anyway, so I decided just to leave it in there. As you can see, there's a jewel that goes on the top. That is not always the case on watches. Any time that you see one of these ruby jewels being used, they're synthetic rubies, by the way. They're not expensive. Like, they're not worth money like a naturally found ruby would be, but they are chemically identical. So they are 9 on the Mohs scale. They're extremely hard. They are also brittle, which can create problems for when these watches get dropped. but they create a really smooth bearing surface. And anytime you see jewels being used in places where they aren't normally, it usually means the company's trying hard to make this watch even better than it had to be. I can put the barrel bridge on here. It's a little bit tricky because I can't quite test to make sure that everything's lined up until I also get the train wheel bridge on, which is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You may be able to see on there, there's also the serial number on that bridge. And if you ever do have a pocket watch and you want to find out more about it, there's a website called pocketwatchdatabase.com where you can punch in the brand and serial number of your watch, and it'll tell you all types of information about it, when it was made, where it was made, how many of them were made, all that kind of stuff. The thing, though, that you have to be really careful of is, do you remember at the beginning when I showed you where the serial number on the case was? That is not the same thing. That is literally the serial number for the case. There are some times when the case and the movement are matched together, but most of the time that's not. And that's not true because cases wear out a lot and people would buy different cases for different movements. It would be kind of like if you could pick what engine you wanted for a car and then pick what car you wanted the engine to go in, like how it looked, you know, that kind of thing. They were able to do that. When you went to the watchmaker or to the watch supplier store, you know, they would say, okay, here's a great, you know, railroad grade movement. And, you know, I can give you a deal on this solid gold case or this beautiful plated case, or they would have some that were already put together, that kind of thing. But the key is when you go to Pocket Watch Database, you have to put in this serial number of the movement. Now that almost always only means taking off the back. You don't have to take anything apart. You just need to take off the back of the watch to look at the movement. I realize now, by the way, that jewel setting that goes on the top actually goes on first, and then this outer bracket part goes around it to keep everything secure. So I have to take it off and put it back on, but that's okay. Little tiny screws here. I don't know how they made these. I kind of know how they made these. I did look it up because I had so many people ask me when I worked on really old watches about how they made the little tiny parts. And it was really funny. What I found was that the machines that they used to make them were really big, like really, really big machines. And they were mostly, I think they called them auto lathes, which is like an automatic lathe, right? So it can mill and shape metal, but they would do it to exacting tolerances, but at a big scale. Okay, now we can put the ratchet and crown wheel into place. This one's the crown wheel. For those of you that watch a lot, you'll know. Watch this. That's right. It goes the other way. This is a reverse threaded screw, just like they use on the modern movements now. I'm going to put a little bit of medium viscosity oil where the barrel meets up on that jeweled portion on the bottom, just to make sure that it can run as smoothly as possible. Also, I realized I didn't actually take off this little tiny cover plate when I disassembled the watch. I kind of wonder if I just didn't see it. It blends in so well with a little perlage on there, but I'm just going to take it off now just to make sure that there's nothing underneath as far as dirt or anything. It went through the cleaning cycle, so it should be fine. But you know, I didn't take it off first, and I want to make sure. So I'll use a little bit of Rodico just to make sure that there's no debris or anything sitting on there. And once again, medium viscosity oil for that little post. And then I'm going to use a little bit of this blue grease on the cannon pinion itself, because the cannon pinion, that's actually the bottom of the center wheel, I should say. This is the cannon pinion, and it is friction fit. So you do want to make sure that you put some grease on there, because it's going to be metal on metal rubbing up against each other there, and you don't want it to jam up. Take a look at how crazy this part is. I mean, it has the perlage on it, yet it fits absolutely perfectly in there still, even after all these years and all these services. And these screws here, these are even smaller than the ones that I had put on prior. So we can just re-secure this little plate. And a little bit of grease where the keyless works meets up here. For similar reasons, anytime there's kind of a high friction metal on metal situation, you're going to want to use that grease. Okay, so I want to put on the winding stem, the sliding clutch, and the clutch wheel. And I think that they only go on the other side. Yeah, they do. Okay, well, this is what happens when you don't work on pocket watches all the time. I did not know that. So a very quick undoing here means that I will reveal where they lay. Now, before I do install them, by the way, sometimes this happens. If you are trying this out as a hobby, like I mentioned before, you have to have patience with yourself and you have to have patience with the watch. But that's also the key to success in this hobby is that, you know, if you're doing it for the pleasure of it, you don't have a client waiting for you, right? You don't have somebody breathing down your neck saying, hey, I want my watch back. I'm paying you money. You can just take your time. And that's what I did when I first started. I just said, look, I'm going to make a small goal for myself each time I sit down at the bench. I'm going to further my project by one step, but recognizing that I was still very much learning and I had a lot to learn still, I would just set a small goal. And then the next day I'd come back and do it again. And that's really how you can kind of progress yourself further. You don't have to do it all at once. Okay, now, and the reason I say that is because sometimes you have to do this, right? I had to completely undo a bunch of work that I had already done and go back and put it all back together again. And this is normal, you know, for a hobbyist. I think if you're a full-time professional watchmaker, you probably know the inside and out of these things a little bit better to not kind of fall for that trap. But yeah, that is not what I do. So there you go. Once again, a little bit of medium viscosity oil on a post here, and that'll allow me to continue to install the keyless works. As you can see, this is that lever. Remember the little lever that I had to pull out to set the time? This is actually what it looks like. The little tab at the end is the part that you can grab with your finger, but everything that you can't see is this kind of beautiful shape that sits underneath. And what will happen is this will allow me to take the watch and put it into hand setting mode rather than winding mode. See how it's kind of spring loaded there as well? That's just another little feature so that it will go back into its little slot and you can put the bezel back on and it won't slip out while you're putting the bezel on and then, you know, bend up a bunch of stuff. Okay, once again, I'm going to use this blue grease on all of the high friction areas. So you can see as I pull this out, it kind of clicks over into another place. Now I put on a little bit too much grease, so I'm going to use my Rodico to just clean it up. You don't want to have that sitting, you know, on top like that. You only want the grease to go exactly where you want it. Here's another absolutely wild part from this watch. I think if you watch a lot of my videos, you're probably going, well, that looks kind of different. They had this like counterbalance thing that they put on the end of the pallet fork. It makes it look kind of like an insect or something. It looks cool, but that isn't normal. And this was a thing that was around for a little while. They apparently has been deemed unnecessary, but it's like another feature of this watch. I can put the pallet fork into place now, and the pallet fork bridge will go over top. One of the really cool things about these watches is that they are quite simple. I know that there's a lot of parts here, and when you saw the parts laid out, you probably thought, well, that doesn't look very simple to me. But as far as watches go, you know, this is a time-only watch, right? It just has hours, minutes, and seconds hand. That's it. So we're like most of the way through getting this watch back together at this point. Like that's the cool part about starting off with something like this. Okay, so once the pallet fork is lined up, I can tighten down the pallet fork bridge and make sure that the pallet fork wants to rock back and forth smoothly, because that's going to be a requirement for this watch to run. And that means we can put back the balance. And we'll see if this thing will kick back up to life. Ooh. And there it goes. It has indeed kicked back up to life. I love to see that. We'll make sure that the balance bridge is firmly secured. And then what I'll often do is take a pointer stick to stabilize it while I screw in the one screw that holds it in place. I just don't need that thing slipping over and then me screwing it down and breaking stuff. That is not a world that I need to live in right now. Now that the watch is running, we can oil the jewels. So I like to use the microscope for this. It's not entirely necessary, but it makes it a little easier to see what you're doing. And it also makes it a little easier for me to show you what I'm doing. And I can use usually the 9010 oil, which is like the super light one, that one there. But on the bigger jewels with the bigger pivots, I'll use the medium viscosity oil, which is called HP 1300. As you can see, this one has an extended pivot and just a little bit of oil around it. Will keep this watch running well. You don't need much. In fact, it's usually a challenge to try to use the correct amount in terms of not enough rather than too much. But yeah, with that done, I can now once again remove the balance. And the reason for that is I need to oil the jewels on the top and bottom of the balance. And this is a lot trickier than on like a modern watch where you've probably seen my videos where I take the jewel setting out from the shock spring. There's no shock spring here. So this requires disassembling the balance, including taking off the balance wheel and the balance spring to get access to that jewel setting. And it's a lot. But here's the thing. I got a new tool. Look at this thing. I'm going to try this thing out for the first time. I saw it on a video and check out how it works. There's these little soft pins that stick up and then you turn the side and it locks them into place. And the idea is that you can put small parts on it like this and then that are kind of irregularly shaped and then tighten it down. Actually seems to be working pretty cool. I got to admit, I was a little skeptical, but if this thing will actually hold these parts in place safely, it makes it's just, they get wobbly if you put them on a flat surface. And if you put them on Rodico, you know, that kind of silly putty stuff, sometimes that can get, it'll smush down over time and the thing will kind of move around. And I want a more steady base. This thing seems to be kind of working. I'm a little surprised, to be honest, but let's see. So now I can flip this whole thing over. And the first thing I notice is there's actually a spring in here. This is just mind-blowing. This spring is a tensioner spring to hold the regulating arm in position. Like, they don't do that anymore. That is just not a thing. I need to take this whole regulating arm off right here. But this has a spring on the bottom just to keep it steady. That's how precise they made this. It is really, really impressive. With that all out of the way though, now I can use my pointer to push out the jewel setting. And as you can see, there's actually two jewels, just like there are in modern watches. There's a cap jewel and a hole jewel. The hole jewel has a hole that the pivot actually goes in, and the cap jewel sits on top and provides a little bit extra layer of like dust protection, but also it holds the oil itself. And as you can see, I'm going to use some pegwood here just to make sure that everything is perfectly clean on that. And then I can go about reassembling the top of the balance bridge here. So the whole jewel will go in first. And as you can see, I'm just going to use my pointer here to set it into place. And I'm actually going to use another new tool, although this is a new old tool, an old new tool. I've had this one for a while and I didn't like it, but I figured this would be a good chance to actually give it a shot, and I'll show it to you in just a second. So what I'm actually going to do is put the cap jewel into place dry. You notice I didn't put any oil on that. Normally I'd put oil on it first and then put it into place. The downside to doing it that way is that the oil can get displaced. So I'm going to try this. This is called an automatic oiler. So I can take, this is the Mobius 9010, the thin viscosity oil. And what I can do is I can fill up the cap of this oiler with it. I like to use my tweezers to do this because you can kind of control how much oil you're actually using. And then this thing looks like a pen, like a writing utensil. The difference is that it has a long, thin needle at the end. You can use that as a guide to make sure that the oil is actually going into the jewel hole. And then there's a little lever on the side. Watch what happens when I pull that little tiny lever up on the side. So that would be where it's going to go. And then I pull up that little lever. And if you look on my block, there's a little tiny deposit of oil. And that is meant to be the exact right amount for a jewel like this. So I'm going to try it out. I've been a little skeptical, and this tool is definitely very fiddly, but I've never really found a way I was super happy with for these pocket watch movements. So let's see if I can work it. So first the needle has to be in place, and then I can just click up and remove it. That's it. You can see why people like these. That's much, much quicker. I'm a little skeptical about where that oil goes and how it sits in the jewel setting, but the truth is you're fighting it either way. Because if you do it the other way and you have to, work that jewel back in, kind of rocking it back and forth, you're going to risk displacing that oil anyway. So I'm going to give this thing a try and we'll see what kind of results we get. And if it works out, I may actually keep it around. And I'm definitely going to keep this little adjustable stand thing around. It's actually, it's working. I'm kind of surprised. So now I can put this regulation arm back on. This arm is what you push back and forth to regulate the watch. And you know what? I'm going to show you that too, because this watch has the capability to run really, really well, I think. And I want to make it run perfect. I want this thing to be just fantastic. And usually when we talk about that, there's three main numbers to consider. There's the most important one, of course, which is the rate. That's how much the watch loses or gains per day in terms of time. We want that as close to 0 as possible. Then there's the amplitude, and that's how much power is getting from the mainspring through the train of wheels and to the balance. And for a watch like this, we'd like that to be, somewhere in the 290 to 310 range, I think would be ideal. And then there's the beat error, and that's kind of the alignment of the pallet fork. And we'd like that to be as close to 0 as possible. Now, before we do any regulation, though, we still have more oiling to do. So this is the exact same jewel setup. It's just that this is the bottom, right? There's that pivot for the balance. It's like an axle. It has one side and then the other, or one top and then the bottom. And this is the bottom. So I need to do the exact same thing. The cool part is that this is just screwed directly into the main plate of the watch itself rather than the balance bridge. So it's a little bit easier to work on. There's two screws that hold it into place, and I can do the exact same process that I did with the balance on this one, where I clean the jewel, make sure that it's spotless. I am once again going to use pegwood just to do a little bit of manual cleaning on that surface to make sure that there's no dried on oil, there's nothing left. Then I can put these two jewels back into the main plate, and then I'll use the automatic oiler again on the other side here. So with that all perfectly clean, now I can put, once again, the whole jewel in first. And again, I'm just going to use kind of a pointer to gently rock it into place. It can turn sideways. You're putting a decent amount of pressure on it. So I'd like to do it just a little bit at a time. And again, just to make sure that there's no debris like from my pointer stick or anything like that, I'll use a little bit of Rodico. And then I can put this cap jewel into place the same way. This one doesn't go down as far because it sits flush with the main plate, and then it's just held secure by these two little baby screws. So again, I can use the flat end of my pointer stick just to make sure that it's completely flattened and secure. And once it is, I can once again reinstall the little tiny screws that hold that whole thing in place. I like to go back and forth on the screws as well, just to make sure that, neither side gets too screwed down first and it gets crooked or something. So once again, I'll take the automatic oiler. Again, the needle is kind of the guide, and then just a quick pull of the little tiny lever there, and boom, it's good to go. Okay, so now I can put back on the balance once again, but we've got some work to do here because, as I said, I want to put in a little bit of extra work on this to try to get it as close as I possibly can to running. Perfect's a strong word, but you know what I mean. Get it really, really good. And in this case, that's going to take a little bit of work. So the first thing we'll do, just take that thing in. Wow. Is, do you see this control arm here? This is that arm that I was talking about. And if you look at where it ends at the back, so when you turn that back and forth, this little part with those two little stems that stick out the bottom, do you see those right there? those actually grab onto part of the balance spring. And the end effect of moving that back and forth is shortening or lengthening the balance spring. And as you can see, it's now running plus 38 seconds fast per day. And this one has, again, normally it's just a lever you just push over, but this one has this little tiny wheels on the side that are on a screw so that you can adjust it exactly how much you want. Now, given that it's running quite fast, although we've already got it down to 28 seconds a day, I'm going to show you how I do it. And in this case, it's pretty straightforward. I am just going to manipulate these little wheels. And what that will do is move that regulator arm over until I'm happy with the result. And as you can see, each time I do it, the time grapher in real time starts to change a little bit more, a little bit more. We've got it now to plus 5 seconds. I'm just going to reset it real quick. Sometimes it can be good to do that. You can see the amplitude's up a little bit as well, which is nice. So plus 6 seconds a day. And again, just keep adjusting it until we get it exactly where we want. There's plus 1 seconds a day. Can we get it to 0? Maybe just a little bit more of a turn. Is that enough? Oh, it looks like it is. 0 seconds a day. That is exactly what you want to see. 290 degrees of amplitude. And that's fantastic. The one thing that we're missing, that beat error. As you saw, it was still sitting at about 2.3 milliseconds off. Now, if you look down the barrel between these two pins, you'll see a red jewel. That is meant to rest directly between those two. And what the beat error is actually measuring is how far out of whack that is. So when I can see that with my own eyes, it means I know which direction I can make the adjustment. Now, here's the tricky part. This is why I don't do this on some watches. If the beat error is within a reasonably acceptable range, is because you have to do this every time to adjust it, and you have no idea how much you adjusted it. So first you have to take the balance off. Then I have to take a tiny, tiny screwdriver, and I have to insert it in the collet, that little metal piece that holds that spring on, and I have to turn it ever so slightly over, and then I have to put all of it back together again. This needs to be reinstalled on the balance bridge. That includes lining things up, making sure everything's good, and then doing a little tiny screw that sits right next to the balance spring, which, by the way, is the most delicate part on a watch, period. If you slip and you bend it, you have to do almost nothing to bend it. And you have to do this every time you want to make any adjustment to it. And it's guesswork. Like, there's no marks, there's no line. It's just getting it to be lined up in the right place with your eyeball or putting it back on the time grapher. So once again, let's take a look at if I made any improvement here. Again, looking at the jewel, I'll just kick up the balance wheel, and where it rests naturally, I want that jewel directly between those two posts. That does actually look pretty decent. It can be difficult to eyeball it. And then I have to put it back in the case to wind it. I'll spare you that, but let's see what it does now. Oh, we made an improvement. So now it went from 2.3 milliseconds to 1.1 milliseconds. So that's really good. And I get to do all of this over again. So let out the power on the mainspring. That involves putting this type of watch back into the case again. So to wind it or to let it down, it has to be in the case. Then I need to take the balance off. Then I need to take the balance apart. Then I need to make an adjustment. Then I need to put it back on. Then I need to screw that back on. Then I need to put it back in the watch. Then I need to wind up the watch. And then it goes back on the time grapher again for another check to see how we did. So let's do it again. Ooh. Okay, so I think I know what this means. So the beat error is actually worse now. It's back to 2.9, but it doesn't tell you which side. You know how I told you that that jewel needs to be in the middle? Where is it off to the left or is it off to the right? It doesn't actually tell you on the time grapher. And what I think I did is I actually went the other way a little bit too far. So I'm going to move it back a little bit towards the original direction, and we'll see if that is enough to get it right. This is very much a feel thing. And you just have to kind of keep plugging at it and do the guesswork. Let's see where it ends up. Ooh, this is a good thing. Oh, this is a really good thing. So that line in the middle, when it's just a straight line, means the beat error is 0. Look at that, 0 seconds a day, 0 beat error, and 290 degrees of amplitude. We did it. That is as good as I can get a watch to run. I mean, period. That's probably the best I've ever gotten a watch to run on here. So this watch was up to the challenge, right? Because I wanted to challenge myself on this and try to make this thing run like amazingly well, because I know that these type of movements are capable of it, but the watch has to cooperate, and it totally did. That feels really, really good. Okay, so now I can put the dial back on, and then that of course means that we can do the final assembly stuff, which is the hands. I've got a fancy little press that I use for this. I got it as a Christmas gift. But you can use a handheld version of this, or if you don't have that, you can even use your tweezers. It's not recommended because they can damage the hands. The hands are actually quite delicate. But I mean, look, if you're doing this as a hobby at home, you do what you got to do, right? People use those things forever. Okay, now we can put on the seconds hand, and we're almost done. These pocket watches go together very quickly at the end. There's this kind of ring that goes around the outside. I think it helps the movement fit in the case a little bit better, and also protects the delicate parts on the side. And you can see this thing's looking really nice. Now we can get the case. And again, I did put this case through the ultrasonic cleaner, so it's good and clean. And that's all you need to do. You can technically polish these, but if you overdo it, you will break through the gold plating, and you'll hit the brass underneath, and it doesn't look very nice by comparison. I use an air blower and sometimes the Rodico to make sure that there's no dust or debris underneath. And then I can screw on the front part. Take a look at this movement one last time. The good news is the movement as it sits, it's really easy to take off the back of the case. Like, you don't need tools for it. You can just use your hands, and you can get a glimpse of this absolutely stunning movement anytime you want. You know, the owner of this watch could even display it that way, you know, put it in that glass dome thing or whatever, and you could just like look at the movement side. Frankly, it's the most beautiful part of the watch anyway. Okay, just a quick cleaning with a microfiber cloth, and there it is, this beautiful Elgin pocket watch from 1913 with a grade 372 railroad movement inside of it. And yes, we can also set the time. You just take off the front. Once again, lift this little lever so that it kind of clicks over, and then the crown will allow you to set the hands to whatever time you want it to be. This was a really fun one to work on. It's just cool to work on something that was made so well, so long ago, and still holds up after the test of time. And these pocket watches, they'll last forever. If these are properly serviced, they will last forever. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And this one can now be handed down to a family member as a way to remember his dad. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this. Getting to work on watches like this is part of what I love doing it, and I'm really happy to be able to share it with you. And I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me. If you want to find me on Instagram, I am wristwatch_revival. I would love to say hi to you over there. And with that, thanks again for hanging out. We'll see you next time.